So welcome everyone to the Enviro-Art Gallery. The mission of the Enviro-Art Gallery is to inspire greater environmental stewardship through the creation and sharing of environmental art. So if you haven't checked out our website, you definitely should. We have a ton of environmental art up there. And I think it's over 600 pieces and a ton of bios of our speakers as well. So if you missed a speaker session, definitely check it out. And we have a few more coming up in the next day or two as well. So please check that out. And so I'm going to introduce Annea. So Annea was born in New Zealand in 1939, and she has been living in the US since 1937. Annea is known for her exploration of the rich world of natural acoustic sounds and environments. Her compositions range from sound art and environmental sound installations to concert music, and her recent works include Becoming Air, Wild Energy, and Into the Vanishing Point. Water has been a recurring focus of her work and her three installation sound map of rivers. So the Hudson River, the Danube, and the Housatonic River have been widely represented in her works. And her music has been issued on CD, vinyl, and a bunch of online outlets as well. She is a recipient of the 2021 Society for Electroacoustic Music in the United States Lifetime Achievement Award. So thank you so much for coming today, Annea, and feel free to take it away.
Thank you, Jessica. Thank you very much. Nice intro. As Jessica said, I'm a composer who often works with environmental sound and have done so for many years. Water just keeps turning up in my compositions and one after another, and I'm not even an aquarium. Somebody once asked me why the sound of moving water counts as music for me, which was actually a really rich question to think about. For me, it's a form of found music, intricate, always changing in its details, forming many layered textures, full of internal pitch patterns and rhythms, much like human composed music. As in this recording I made on the Housatonic River in 2009. This is a complex, layered sound, as the flow of the water itself is layered from surface to stream bed. It's lovely to listen down through the layers from higher to lower, and it takes a little time. It takes me a little time to do that listening down process. So I'm giving you just over 3 minutes of the Westbrook, which is a tributary. This recording moving from Southley into Stockbridge. It was made at 3:20 in the afternoon on June 20th, 2009. Thank you, Jessica. If you could play the first clip, please. Thank you, Jessica. So there, we ended in Stockbridge early in the morning, really early in the morning for me at any rate, about 6 a.m. It was super quiet. I was intent on recording in Stockbridge. It's an iconic place for musicians. Charles Ives wrote a most beautiful orchestral piece, which you may have heard, dedicated to Stockbridge, his impressions of it. He loved that site. So there was no way I was going to record the Housatonic without recording Stockbridge, but there was very little motion in the water. It was really still. I found a little eddy around a rock not far from the bank, and some great bird action going on in the bushes. So I spent quite a long time in Stockbridge. It was a lovely site. There's a lot of variety from one site on a river to another, of course, and also within any one site, depending on flow rate, water level, the ongoing changes in the riverbed and banks. I once found a beautiful sounding place on the Danube where water was weaving through tree roots. But at dusk, when I wasn't going to be able to maneuver well without falling into the river, so I decided to come early in the next morning. And when I did, it had rained overnight upriver, and the roots were completely underwater, and those distinctive sounds had vanished. And I learned what photographers have long known: record it now or lose it. We're so drawn to rivers and to the environments which they create and sustain. They're tangible, physical presences, often mesmerizing both visually and orally, carrying layers of meaning for us. So it's not hard to feel affected by their energy, and that creates a connection with them. Their sounds fall largely within our hearing range. We can drink them, absorbing them internally. We dive into them, feeling the water currents on our skin, watch the play of light on their constantly shifting surfaces, smell them. They're accessible to all our senses, and we love to listen to them, in part, I believe, because of how deeply their sounds penetrate our bodies. We hear fluid motion very early on, of course, the motion of the amniotic fluid in our mother's wombs, an embedded experience. Going back even further, the great scientist Edward O. Wilson has suggested that these sounds evoke our species' distant origins in the ocean. A most interesting speculation. So we respond to it with our whole bodies, and sound vibrations enter us fast and directly on many levels through bone conduction, cavities, liquids, affecting blood sugar levels, blood pressure, respiration, pulse rate, muscle tension, for just some of the effects. Thus, the upside of the fact that we've got no physical defenses against sound is that we can feel deeply permeated by it, immersed in it. And when this happens, we're making a form of visceral contact with the source of the sound, I feel. This makes sound a powerful, intimate channel through which to experience other phenomena. And then, can we go further to a feeling of interconnectedness, actually, of non-separation? Experiences of deep connection can, I believe, bring changes in how we act as individuals in the environment, an antidote to our inherited but eroding sense of the world's phenomena as purely material resources. And from that can come active caring, such as I'll describe at the end of the talk. In this exhibition, you can hear two of the main sources of the Housatonic River from my work, A Sound Map of the Housatonic River from 2009. The Housatonic flows down through the hill country of the Berkshires in Massachusetts, into Connecticut, and out into Long Island Sound. It's a beautiful river with a recent history of considerable pollution from industries which set up shop along its banks in the 19th and 20th centuries. In 2008 and 2009, I traveled down the river, moving along the banks, not by boat, and recording the river and its environment wherever I found sound which teased my ears. I was traveling by ear, not documenting the river, but observing its flow and seeking out sound which felt alive to me. And from those recordings, I made the sound map, originally a multi-channel installation incorporating a large wall map of the river. This is the third and probably the last of my 3 river sound maps, the other 2 being maps of the Hudson, which I made in 1982, and the Danube, which I made from 2001 to 2005. It's a long river. It was a lot of trips. These installations are purely audio because visuals tend to commandeer one's attention, making sound a background stimulus. Whereas ear, because sound enters our bodies so directly, it invites immersion. And that comes most readily when all your attention is focused orally. So I designed my sound maps, my river maps, with the hope of drawing you into that sense of immersion very much in mind, from the way I make my initial recordings to the overall flow of the work and the details of my installation designs. I like to record very close to the sound source, as here in the next exit you're about to hear, in order to capture all the delicious details of the way a flow from a spring is moving through a road culvert, resonating the culvert in the left channel. Then when the right channel enters just yards downstream, its sound changing perceptibly as its channel deepens. This is one of the highest sources of the river, and it opens the sound map. And a train wonderfully showed up partway through my recording session. So I was recording on Spring Hill Farm on Summit Road in Hinsdale at 1:22 p.m. mid-June. And the recording's just under 4 minutes long. So if you could, number 2, please, Jessica, thanks. Bringing you this close to the water, I'm aiming to draw you inside the sound so that you feel the water's energy directly within your body, not so much listening to as listening within. The Housatonic was a real challenge to work with. The river's valleys provide ways to move through the hilly country of the Berkshires, so a major north-south road, Route 7, runs alongside the river all the way through Massachusetts and down through Connecticut, bringing the gray drone of traffic into my mics if I'm not careful. I gave up on several sites where it was unavoidable and often got up early in the morning to beat it, as at Stockbridge. Why avoid it? I'm sometimes asked. It's because I've long felt that traffic is usually of minimal interest as sound, but it can easily override and mask other more subtle environmental sound. In addition, although we're often able to habituate to it in our daily environments and screen it out, when you listen to an unfamiliar recording, you hear everything, unable to filter out the traffic band as we do normally, so it becomes intrusive and distracting. I managed to find times and places where it disappeared, and on one occasion I actually sorted out when I recorded a covered bridge in Cornwall, Connecticut, with a wonderful gritty wooden road surface, an old bridge, and the bridge would rumble really nicely when cars passed over it. So as usual, I placed my mic close to the roadway and loved the stereo motion the passing cars created. Then I recorded the river from under the bridge and mixed the two perspectives. So number 3, please, Jessica, and it's just under 3 minutes. This is Cornwall Bridge, Connecticut. Or recorded at 11:40 in the morning, the bridge, and 2 in the afternoon, the river on April 14th. And we ended up with a woodpecker in the woods near Kent, Connecticut. My river sound maps aren't in any sense documentaries. When I recorded on the Danube, I omitted Bratislava, Vienna, Budapest, Bucharest, the major cities, all of which were lined with riprap and stone walls which aren't sonically interesting to me. Instead, as I mentioned, I travel by ear, listening for water sound which is alive. And I can't explain the term semantically, but I know it instantly when I hear it. So I walk along the bank listening, and when I find such a sound mix coming up from the water, set up my rather minimal equipment. My criterion is that it all has to fit in my relatively small backpack. Listen for a little while, and then get really comfortable, switch to record, and stay absolutely still for up to half an hour. A relatively long duration because with field recording, you never know what may happen next, generating some sound you couldn't have imagined. A very meditative and peaceful process. There are many old industrial sites along the Housatonic's banks, with weirs and dams, some still operating, others falling apart, one of which you can hear a white water roar in the excerpt, which is in the exhibition itself. They're fun to record, but those sites have been polluting the river since the 19th century, until quite recently. The paper mills, the blast furnaces working iron ore, and notoriously GE's battery manufacturing plants, which between 1932 and 1977 leached indestructible PCBs into the river upstream near Pittsfield, which is the site of the confluence of the east and west branches, at Lenox, and downstream. The last site I'm going to play you right now, and the last site you'll hear in the excerpt itself in the exhibition, takes us back upriver and was recorded at a lovely grassy clearing on the bank, an Audubon wildlife sanctuary named Canoe Meadows in the Pittsfield area. Walking through the site, I came to a sign posted right by the river, a warning to canoeists and others, PCB contaminated area. If you get any mud on your skin, wash it off as soon as possible. To say this was full-on cognitive dissonance is an understatement. But I recorded there with great pleasure, carefully, at 6:50 a.m. on June 19th and moved on downstream. So here is Canoe Meadows, the Sackett Brook, Pittsfield, 6:50 a.m. June 19th. It's about 2¼ minutes. Very quiet. Thank you, Jessica. I'm always moving downriver, following the river's unfolding, listening to the underlying geology through its sounds, and conscious that I'm hearing it shaping its bed and its banks in real time as I listen. Rivers have agency, and they shape the whole surrounding ecology, from aquatic insect communities to human communities and far beyond. We may think we shape them, but they shape us more profoundly. Can we sense the interconnectedness I referred to earlier, the underlying reality, non-separation, as the Te Awa Tupua iwi or tribe do in New Zealand? On March 14th, 2017, in a world first, a river was granted legal personhood. Te Awa Tupua, also known as the Whanganui River in the North Island of New Zealand, which I remember from childhood as a beautiful, calm river flowing through low hills and bush, a wild river then, and still now, because on that date, something the iwi had been striving for 140 years came to pass: protection for the river. On that date, Parliament passed a bill settling the historic claims of the iwi as they relate to the river. A highly significant part of that bill centered on, to quote, the legal recognition of Te Awa Tupua as comprising the river from the mountains to the sea, its tributaries, and all its physical and metaphysical elements as an indivisible and living whole. It further establishes that the river is a legal person and has all the rights, powers, duties, and liabilities of a legal person. In order to tangibly implement these rights, the bill created a well-funded office to be the human face of Te Awa Tupua, to act, speak for, and on behalf of the river, to promote and protect the health and the well-being of Te Awa Tupua. That office consists of two people, one nominated by the iwi, the other by a government minister. And the bill stipulates that this office, quotes, must act in the interests of the river and consistently with the intrinsic values that represent the essence of the river, including and especially that, quote again, the iwi and the hapu, a subtribe of the Whanganui River, have an inalienable connection with and responsibility to Te Awa Tupua and its health and well-being. The river's new status ensures that if it's harmed now, the law will not distinguish between harming the tribe and harming the river. They are indivisible. And all of this flows from the iwi and the hapu's long recognition of non-separation. They have a saying, I am the river and the river is me. They are kin. And this has recently inspired the protection of northern Quebec's Magpie River, which was also given legal personhood through twin resolutions by the local First Nation Innu People's Council and by the local municipality of Mingani. And in this country, Timothy Egan wrote recently, while hiking in the Sawtooth Range of his home state, Idaho, Representative Mike Simpson, to quote, saw a 3-foot salmon in a stream at the end of its 870-mile round trip to the Pacific and back home. These are the most incredible creatures I think God has created, he said. We shouldn't mess with God's creation. So he is currently proposing a $33.5 billion infrastructure and community investment strategy, which would breach and remove the 4 lower Snake River dams, starting in 2030, and allowing that entire stretch of this major Northwest river to run free from Idaho into the Columbia and onto the sea. And the great historic runs of salmon, we hope, can rebuild. There's nothing abstract in the source of his thinking. It was triggered by an intense encounter with a very specific live being, that salmon. Hiking by a river can do this too. And I hope that listening to that amazing living flow, even through headphones, can also do that. Thank you very much for listening. And Jessica and Isabel and everybody else involved in setting this up. I'm most grateful to you for inviting my participation.
Yeah, thank you so much. This was both simultaneously relaxing and engaging at the same time, which is fantastic. So the first thing I wanted to draw everyone's attention to, I see that Patricia put a link in the chat, a video portrait of Annea. And so if anyone wants to check that out, then I would definitely point them to the chat. And so now I just wanted to start the Q&A. And so if anyone has any questions, feel free to unmute. And if multiple people unmute at the same time, then I can just kind of say who can go first. And if you're not comfortable unmuting, then you can type it out in the chat and I can read it off myself. So anyone want to go first? Any questions?
Yeah, Annea, I would love to ask a question. So I was wondering what inspired you to go into this field? Did you study like music or any sort of arts in college, and like how you ended up here, I guess?
Oh, I think I was trapped by the age of 5, so to speak. My mother was a musician. And so my brother and I both started learning instruments when we were little kids. I was lucky to have some really good teachers when I was a child. And I was also lucky to grow up half in wild country. My father was a mountaineer first and a lawyer second, and he took us up into the Alps, in the Southern Alps of New Zealand. Every possible holiday, he and my mother would bring us up there. And so we were clambering about in the Alps and learning about how to respect rivers at a very young age. And I love the sound of rivers. There are various childhood practices that I evolved that drew me inside those sounds at an early age. And from then on, by the time I was 12, I knew I wanted to be a composer, and things worked nicely, smoothly for me. I was very lucky. From then on, got my training, learned how to survive as a freelance musician, and kept on working with musicians and making work and listening to rivers.
Awesome. Thank you. I'll just read, there are a couple comments in the chat. So Elaine said, thank you so much. This was thoroughly relaxing and enjoyable. And Deanna said, thank you. Amazing how the sounds have such an embodied impact. And that kind of leads into a question that I have. So if I can ask real quick before anyone else, is why do you think sound has such a strong impact on humans? I know you talked briefly about it in when you were speaking about kind of how our relationship with rivers maybe makes it penetrate our bodies more. But I'm just wondering if you could talk why you think sound alone is more impactful than maybe sound with visual or potentially other senses.
Let me tackle the part of your question which asks why sound alone seems more powerful than sound combined with visuals. I think our culture has trained us to expect to get the most pertinent information from visuals, and that our minds go straight to what our eyes are taking in. And sound, unless it's really loud or abrupt, or feels threatening in some way, tends to seep into our awareness a little more slowly. To begin with, I think we evolved. Many people think we evolved to pay close attention to sound, just as a survival, as aspect of our survival, in various soundscapes, various parts of the world. Sound carries over long distances. Low sound carries over really long distances, perhaps further than our visual horizon can stretch. So in a way, we get information from further away through sound, perhaps, than through our eyes. All these things sort of converge. And like many of my friends, many of us are sort of working to buck the automatic prioritization of visuals. So I know a filmmaker, Sam Green, who loves sound, works with it really beautifully. And he just blacks out the screen and asks you to close your eyes and listen. And rings a little bell, and then he rings the bell again when he'd like you to open your eyes. And I love that. That's really, for a filmmaker, that's radical. So various ways of, we're trying to design to, as I say, bring sound back into people's full awareness. And when it comes to us and is completely unthreatening, it does us so much good, doesn't it? I mean, it really releases our bodies so beautifully and gently. I think it's a source of great nourishment for us. I've long thought that rivers operate on two levels. There's an apparent sameness to the sound of a particular site or a flow around through a couple of particular rocks, but we keep listening. And I think in a way, the apparent repetition lulls our bodies physiologically, but in fact, the sound is constantly changing. There are constantly new events in it, and that engages the scanning part of our brain, which is scanning for information. So we get it on two levels, I think, and it's really, really enticing.
Yeah. That's very interesting. Yeah, I've never really thought about those two levels before, but that makes a lot of sense. So do we have any other questions? Anyone want to unmute and ask, or just make comments if it's not a question specifically? If not, I do have one more question, and then we can see if anyone has any after that, and if not, then we can kind of wrap up. But my last question was about the difficulties that you face when actually going out and doing this work. I was just wondering if you could talk about like the obstacles that arise and some challenges about doing the recordings, finding the right spot. So just the difficulties in general.
I guess logistical, but they never seem too severe somehow. My ears tell me what the right spot is. And I get really close to the surface of the water and listen very intently. And if I'm not hearing it, my companion may well. I did the Danube with my partner, Ruth Anderson, who's also a composer, a very good composer. And one day I was watching some Romanies drive a truck down into the river in Romania to wash it, and they drove a fair way into the river. And I was preoccupied trying to figure out, it was a silt bank, how they were going to get out again, whether the truck was going to get stuck. I was watching all this going on. Meanwhile, Ruth, of course, being a sensible person, was listening to the river, and she found a most amazing sound I've never heard anywhere else, which I then proceeded to record. So other than that, I don't know things. We would never. The Danube was the most challenging because it was the longest river to work with, and it took 6 trips, and they were each between 5 and 6. No, sorry, five trips, each between 5 and 6 weeks long, going through amazing territory. And the most challenging part there used to be arrive around 4 in the afternoon, 5 in the afternoon, where we needed to find somewhere to sleep for the night because we never made prior arrangements. It wasn't practical, and it wasn't fun. So it was a lot of fun just trying to figure out where we might find lodging, how it would work out, whether we'd find it in time, and so on, night after night. And we always did. But I don't like to plan too far ahead with these trips because I never know what's going to show up, what's going to be totally fascinating, what I'm going to want to return to. So I do it by the seat of my pants, fully pragmatically, and that seems to work out just fine. So the challenges don't seem great. Haven't dropped a mic in the river yet.
Awesome. Yeah, that's wonderful. So I'll do one last call. If anyone has any last questions, I'll give it maybe 5 seconds.
Yeah, I actually have a couple more questions. So your sound files that you take from the river must be so long. So how do you go about picking and choosing which parts you end up wanting to include in your final edits?
Okay, to go back to the Danube, I recorded at 80 sites, and 59 of them ended up in the sound map. I go through a first pass, just listening to all of them to pick out those which are most distinctive, and getting rid of sites which seem too similar to one another. I'll choose one of them, but not both. And so that thins things down a bit. In fact, that's the primary choosing mechanism involved. After that, I'm composing with them. I'm trying to figure out how to move you from the sounds of one site into another without pulling you out of your engagement with inside the sounds, so to speak. Every now and then I'll make an abrupt switch to wake everything up, so to speak. But mostly these are long overlaps of the sites, and it's fun trying to figure out. I try to figure out how long I would want to listen to a particular site, purely subjectively, because I didn't have anyone else's ears around, and decide on which part of a particular recording sounds the most vivid to me, or where something really interesting happened, and then how long I'd want to listen to that particular site and move it on from there. They're all, well, the last two of the three are multi-channel. The Danube is a 5.1 that's 5 channels and a subwoofer, and the Housatonic is 4.1. It's quad and the sub. And the Hudson was done in stereo because that's what I was working with at that point back in the early 80s. Traveling around with a Nakamichi cassette recorder, stereo cassette recorder, stereo mics. So by the time I get to the Danube, I really want to surround you with the river. Form a circle with the speakers, not the traditional 5.1 setup of front, middle, back, which you used to experience in cinemas, but a circle. And the river swirls around you. You sit on something very comfortable in the middle of the circle, and it's everywhere.
Yeah, my other question is, I was wondering, I guess, how you go about the editing, like a little more with the editing process. Like, do you keep all of the sound natural, or do you do any sort of editing to change this natural sound? Because I wonder, I guess, if you do, what sort of line you draw between like completely natural sound and sort of like man-made, like, I don't know if you do add anything to them, but yeah.
Very, very rarely, because I want to pull you inside the river's energies so that you feel no separation between yourself and the river. And when we manipulate sound, very often listeners become aware of the manipulation, and that places some sort of filter. If you think you're listening to a river and something in the sound changes in a way which doesn't sound likely in a natural setting, that immediately pulls you back a little way from what you're listening to, which is the opposite of what I want to happen. So I do very little. I think with the Danube, in one spot, in a hydrophone recording, an underwater recording down in Baikal, the audio engineer with whom I made the final multi-channel mix, and I decided it might be nice to put a little reverb on these amazing sounds I was getting from under the water. So we added a little reverb. Really, that was it. I find water very easy to edit. There is so much detail in those sounds. For some reason, because when you intervene to make an edit, it doesn't slice into the continuum in the same way as a very smooth sound, as would happen with a very smooth sound. So, and besides, it's a lot of fun to edit. So for me, the question is always, okay, can I find similarities in the sonic details between the site we're just leaving and the site we're coming to? And very often I can. So the transition from one site into another operates through these similarities, which I sometimes bring out with equalization, balancing, rebalancing. And so that you move ideally, you move without realizing that you're moving into a new site until you're actually there. So that's one of the things, one of the techniques I use for editing. But water editing is really fun. Can you do it without it being obvious? It's really fun.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's super interesting because I guess I've never really heard about the behind the scenes of how you do all of that.
Yeah, thank you. And yeah, thank you so much for coming, for chatting, for sharing your sounds, your recordings with us, and your experiences as well. I loved hearing about your stories. Is really, really informational and entertaining and just very relaxing overall. A nice break from about to be finals. Yeah. So yeah, thank you so much. And thank you to everyone who came and listened as well. Don't forget, this recording will be posted on the website, the Enviro-Art Gallery website. And then also, I believe that Cameron, who is the Enviro-Art Gallery founder, will send out emails with the recordings as well. And make sure that you come to some of the other speaker sessions that we have. I think we have 2 more today and 1 more tomorrow. And so, yeah, just thank you all so much. And we can kind of wrap it up and head out.
My pleasure. Thank you all. And thank you, Cameron. Thank you for
Thank
this
you.
opportunity.